Hello, English learners. Welcome to our another important podcast. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to speak English, but suddenly your mind went blank? Maybe you knew the words, but your tongue just refused to move. Or perhaps you were in a conversation, and even though you understood everything, you couldn't bring yourself to respond. If this has happened to you, trust me, you're not alone. In fact, almost every English learner goes through this phase. It's called hesitation, this frustrating pause that stops you from expressing yourself confidently. Now, you might be wondering, why does this happen? Well, hesitation is a mix of different things: fear of making mistakes, worrying about what others might think, or simply not being used to speaking in English. And here's the tricky part. If we hesitate too much, we create a habit of staying silent. The more we stay silent, the harder it gets to speak. It's a cycle that keeps repeating. But here's the good news. Hesitation is not a permanent problem. It's just a mental block. And like any block, it can be removed. Today, we're going to break it down step by step and give you the tools to overcome hesitation so that you can start speaking English with confidence.
That's so true, Adam. Hesitation is something that holds so many learners back, and the worst part is it often has nothing to do with how much English you actually know. I've met students who know thousands of English words, they understand grammar perfectly, they even write beautiful essays. But when it's time to speak, they freeze. It's not because they lack knowledge, it's because they lack confidence. And you know what? That hesitation doesn't come from a lack of ability. It comes from fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of sounding silly. Fear that people might judge you. And this fear is so powerful that it can stop you from speaking at all. But here's the thing, mistakes are not the enemy. Mistakes are proof that you're learning. Think about how children learn to speak. They don't hesitate, they don't overthink. They just try, make mistakes, and improve naturally. So, what if you could remove that hesitation? What if you could speak without fear? That's exactly what we're going to help you with in this episode. So, get ready because by the end of this podcast, you'll have the mindset and strategies to start speaking English with confidence, without overthinking, without fear, and without hesitation. Hesitation isn't just about language. It's mostly psychological. The biggest reason we hesitate is fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, fear of sounding silly. But here's the truth. Most people aren't judging you as much as you think. In fact, native speakers are usually impressed when someone learns their language. Think about a time when you hesitated to speak. What was going through your mind? Were you worried that someone would laugh? That you'd use the wrong word? That your accent wouldn't sound right? These thoughts create a mental block, and that block stops you from speaking naturally. Many learners think, I'll start speaking when I feel ready. But that moment never comes because hesitation grows the more we avoid speaking. It's a cycle. We stay silent, so we don't improve. And then we hesitate even more. The key is to break this cycle by understanding that mistakes are part of learning. Think about children learning to speak. They don't sit down and memorize grammar rules before they start talking. They just try, and they improve over time. Why? Because they don't hesitate. They don't overthink. They just communicate. So here's my question for you. What if you could remove the pressure of perfection? What if you could treat English like a child learning their first language? Speaking would become so much easier, wouldn't it? That's the first step, to change how you see mistakes. Instead of thinking of them as failures, think of them as stepping stones to fluency.
That's such an important point, Sophia. And you know what? One of the biggest reasons people hesitate is perfectionism. So many learners believe they need to speak perfectly before they can even try. But here's the truth. Even native speakers make mistakes. They forget words, they correct themselves, they say and all the time. But they don't hesitate. because they're confident that they'll be understood. Imagine this. You're in a conversation, and you don't know the perfect word. What do? Many learners freeze. They panic. And then they say nothing. But fluent speakers, they find another way to say it. That's called communication flexibility, and it's much more important than perfect grammar. Another reason for hesitation is overthinking. Have you ever tried to translate every word in your head before you speak? It slows you down, right? That's because English and your native language are different. Word order, expressions, and sentence structures don't always match. If you try to translate everything before speaking, you'll always hesitate. Instead of thinking, how do I say this perfectly? Ask yourself, how can I say this simply? The goal of language isn't perfection, it's communication. And fluency doesn't come from knowing every word, it comes from confidence. So, what's the solution? The first step is to let go of the fear of mistakes. Start speaking, even if it's not perfect. The second step? Train yourself to think in English, so you stop translating. And in the next chapter, we're going to show you powerful techniques to help you do just that. All right, now that we've talked about hesitation and why it happens, it's time to address the real game changer in your language learning journey, your mindset. When it comes to speaking English, your mindset can make all the difference between confidence and fear. You see, so many learners approach English with a fear of making mistakes. They're afraid that if they say something wrong, they'll be judged or look foolish. But the truth is, mistakes are not the enemy. They're your allies in this journey. Mistakes are proof that you're learning and growing. The more you make, the more you improve. So, if you're going to be afraid of anything, it should be not speaking at all. I want to ask you, what if you could change how you think about mistakes? Instead of seeing them as failures, what if you saw them as learning opportunities? What if you could embrace making mistakes as part of your growth process? When you start thinking this way, everything changes. You no longer hesitate because you're not focused on the idea of being perfect. You're focused on communicating, and that's where confidence comes from. It's about being comfortable with discomfort. It's okay to feel nervous. But once you stop letting that nervousness control you, you'll find that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. Every time you speak, you become a little more confident, and that hesitation will slowly fade away.
Yes, Adam, I love that. Comfort with discomfort, that's exactly what it's all about. And you're right, confidence doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's something you have to practice and develop over time. I know it sounds simple, but it works. The more you speak, the more confident you become. But here's the catch. You can't expect to feel super confident after just a few attempts. It takes time, and that's okay. Remember, confidence comes with repetition. The more you practice speaking, the less you'll fear making mistakes. When I first started learning languages, I used to avoid speaking altogether because I was so afraid of being wrong. But the more I pushed myself to speak, the easier it got. The key is to start small. Start with little wins. If you're talking to someone in English, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. What matters is that you're trying. And every time you speak, you're building that confidence. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting your message across, and guess what? Even if you make mistakes, people will still understand you. You know, there's a powerful technique that really helped me during my learning journey, visualizing success. Before I even spoke, I would picture myself in a conversation, speaking clearly and confidently. I imagined how it felt to communicate with ease and without hesitation. This mental rehearsal helped me calm my nerves before any real conversation. It worked wonders for me, and it can work for you too.
That's such a fantastic tip, Sophia. Visualization is a tool that's used by top athletes and performers around the world, and it works because it helps you focus on the positive outcome, not the negative fear. And I love what you said about small wins. That's key. If you focus on tiny steps and celebrate those little victories, the overall journey becomes less overwhelming. I think one of the most important things to remember is that fluency doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from confidence. And that confidence comes from speaking, even if it's messy. You won't learn how to swim by reading a book about swimming. You need to get into the water. It's the same with speaking. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become. And another powerful shift in mindset is to stop comparing yourself to others. It's easy to look at a fluent speaker and think, I'll never be as good as them. But here's the thing. Everyone was a beginner at some point. Even the most confident speakers had to start somewhere. So, stop worrying about where you are on your journey and focus on where you want to go. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Each sentence you speak, each conversation you have, is a step forward. The real key is practice, and more importantly, consistency. Speaking a little every day, even for just a few minutes, will gradually increase your confidence. And before you know it, hesitation will become a thing of the past.
Exactly, Adam. Consistency is everything. Even if it's just a sentence or two a day, that practice compounds over time, and you'll be amazed at how much progress you make. And remember, there's no magic formula or shortcut. Confidence comes from doing. The more you try, the more you'll improve. One last thing I want to add. Don't be afraid to embrace your unique learning process. Everyone learns at their own pace, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to speak like a native speaker to be confident or to be understood. The goal is communication, not perfection. So, speak without fear, make mistakes, laugh at yourself, and most importantly, keep going. Now, let's talk about one of the most powerful techniques you can use to overcome hesitation and speak English more fluently. The Think in English method. This is a game changer, and I want to dive into exactly how it works. So think about how you usually speak your native language. You don't translate every single word from another language, right? Your thoughts flow naturally in your native language. But when you're learning English, many learners try to translate from their first language into English, and that slows everything down. You have to stop and think, how do I say this in English? By the time you've figured it out, the conversation has already moved on, and that's where hesitation creeps in. The Think in English method helps you skip this translation process. It trains your brain to think directly in English. Instead of translating words in your head, you're automatically forming sentences in English. Sounds hard, right? It's not, actually. It just takes a little practice. One way to start is by labeling everything around you in English. Whether it's the chair you're sitting in, the food you're eating, or the street you're walking on. Think of the word for it in English. Don't translate it in your head. Just think, that's a table, or I'm drinking coffee. It's simple, but it's the first step to reprogramming your brain.
I love this approach, Sophia. And you're so right about translation being the biggest enemy for many learners. As soon as you translate, you create an extra step between your thoughts and the words you want to say. This makes you hesitate and slows down your speech. But when you start thinking in English, the conversation flows so much more easily. Here's something I've tried that works really well, talking to yourself in English. I know it sounds a little strange, but hear me out. Practice speaking to yourself in English throughout the day, even if it's just for a few minutes. You can describe what you're doing, like, I'm going to the store, or I'm cooking lunch. The goal is to practice thinking in English during everyday situations. Eventually, your brain will start to associate English with your everyday thoughts, and you'll notice that it gets easier to speak without thinking about it so much. And here's an interesting point. Try to avoid thinking in your native language at all costs when speaking English. Instead of mentally translating, challenge yourself to start thinking in English. You'll get better at processing words, forming sentences, and speaking more naturally. The more you do this, the more natural it will feel. This process is one of the most effective ways to avoid hesitation because you stop thinking in two languages. Your brain learns to think in one language. A great way to practice this is through shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to someone speak in English, whether it's a podcast, a video, or a movie, and repeat what they say immediately after hearing it. It's almost like mimicking their words. This technique gets your brain into the habit of thinking and reacting quickly in English. It helps with fluency because it forces you to focus on the meaning of the words, not the translation.
Exactly, Adam. Shadowing is such a powerful technique. It forces your brain to keep up with the pace of natural speech, and it helps with both your listening and speaking skills. But there's another part of thinking in English that we can't forget: internal dialogue. We all have that little voice in our heads, right? The one that says, "I'm nervous," or "What if I make a mistake?" Now, what if you could shift that inner voice to speak to you in English? Every time you start to feel nervous or self-doubt creeps in, turn that internal conversation into English. You could even make a habit of saying positive affirmations in English. "I'm getting better every day," or "Mistakes are part of learning." This kind of mental practice helps your brain stay in English mode, and it encourages you to think more positively. The more you do this, the more you'll start to see results. Another great way to practice thinking in English is by immersing yourself in English media. Watch English TV shows, movies, or listen to music and podcasts. The more you expose yourself to English in a natural context, the more you'll start to pick up on how native speakers use words and phrases. It'll begin to feel like English is just a part of your world, not something foreign that you have to translate. Remember, this takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you make thinking in English a habit, you'll be amazed at how much more confident and fluent you'll feel.
Absolutely, Sophia. It's all about habit. The more you immerse yourself in English, the more natural it becomes. And thinking in English doesn't just help you with speaking, it also helps with understanding. You start to process what others are saying without translating it first. That's when everything clicks. One final tip for everyone: start with simple thoughts. Don't try to think in complex sentences right away. Begin with short, simple phrases and work your way up. For example, start with, "I am walking to the store," or "The weather is nice today." Once you feel comfortable with that, you can start forming more complex sentences. The goal is to practice consistently and gradually build your ability to think in English. All right, let's get down to the practical stuff. Now, we're going to talk about real exercises you can do to speak without fear. Remember, confidence in speaking comes from consistent practice. So let's jump into some exercises that will help you overcome hesitation and speak confidently. The first exercise I want to share is something I call the 1-minute talk. It's super simple but really effective. Here's how it works. Choose any topic you like, anything you're passionate about, something you know well, and speak about it for just 1 minute. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to start speaking without overthinking. At first, it might feel awkward. You might freeze up or hesitate. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the best part is, you're not focusing on grammar or vocabulary. You're focusing on communicating your ideas clearly. Even if you make mistakes, that's okay. The goal is to speak freely and confidently for 1 minute. Do this exercise every day, and you'll notice your hesitation start to melt away.
I love that, Adam. The 1-minute talk is a great way to get comfortable speaking without worrying too much. And another awesome exercise I recommend is the storytelling exercise. This one helps you practice speaking in a more natural, fluent way by tapping into your creativity. Here's how it works. Think of a simple story from your own life, maybe a funny experience you had, or a trip you went on. Now try to retell that story in English, but don't write it down first. The key here is to speak it from memory, just like you would if you were telling the story to a friend in your native language. When you're telling a story, you don't have time to stop and think about grammar or perfect sentences. You're focused on keeping the story flowing. This exercise will help you speak more naturally and fluidly because you're focusing on the flow of ideas rather than individual words. You can start with simple stories, then challenge yourself with more complex ones as you progress. And just like with the 1-minute talk, don't worry about mistakes. Mistakes are part of the process, and they won't stop you from telling a great story. The more you practice telling stories in English, the more confident you'll become.
That's such a great exercise, Sophia. Storytelling is one of the best ways to develop fluency because it forces you to speak in real time. And speaking of fluency, another really useful exercise is the shadowing technique we mentioned earlier. Let me dive a little deeper into how this works. Shadowing is when you listen to someone speak in English, whether it's a podcast, a TV show, or a YouTube video, and immediately repeat what they say as closely as possible. You want to mimic the speed, the pronunciation, and the tone. This exercise trains your brain to respond to English more naturally. Start with short audio clips, something like a 30-second segment from a podcast or video. Listen to it several times, and then try to repeat it word for word. Once you get the hang of that, challenge yourself with longer clips. The cool thing about shadowing is that it improves both your speaking and your listening skills. As you listen to the native speaker, you're training your brain to understand the rhythm and flow of English, which helps you speak more fluently.
Exactly, Adam. Shadowing is incredibly effective. It's one of the best ways to internalize the sounds and rhythms of English. Another exercise that's super helpful is the mirror exercise. This one's really simple but powerful. Stand in front of a mirror and practice speaking in English as if you're having a conversation with someone. You can practice a variety of things, introduce yourself, describe your day, or even act out a conversation you might have with a friend or a colleague. The cool part about using a mirror is that it gives you instant feedback on your facial expressions and body language, which can also help boost your confidence. When you see yourself speaking confidently, even if it's just in the mirror, it sends a message to your brain that you are capable and that speaking English is natural for you. In the beginning, it might feel a little silly, but trust me, the more you do it, the more you'll notice how your confidence grows. And when you're more confident, hesitation has no room to creep in.
I completely agree, Sophia. The mirror exercise is such a simple way to visualize success while speaking. But let's also not forget about role-playing, another great technique. You can practice role-playing different situations, like ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or having a conversation at work. To make it even more fun and effective, find a speaking partner who can help you with this. If you don't have a partner, you can also practice with language exchange apps or even by recording yourself. The idea is to practice real-world situations so that when they come up in real life, you feel ready and confident to speak. One key thing to remember with role-playing is to make it as realistic as possible. For example, if you're practicing ordering food, imagine the restaurant environment. Think about the menu, the waiter's questions, and how you'll respond. This helps your brain connect the language to real-life scenarios, so when it's time to actually speak in those situations, you're not caught off guard.
Such great points, Adam. Role-playing is an amazing way to prepare for real conversations. And last but definitely not least, one of the most important exercises is speaking with real people. Yes, speaking with others, even if it feels uncomfortable, is one of the best ways to reduce hesitation. Try to find language exchange partners, join English speaking groups, or attend meetups where you can practice speaking in a relaxed environment. The more you interact with native speakers or other learners, the more you'll gain confidence. And the best part? The more you speak, the less you'll worry about making mistakes because you'll realize that everyone is focused on the conversation, not on how perfect your grammar is. So, get out there and start talking. The more you speak, the more you'll reduce your fear, and the more fluent and confident you'll become. Now, let's talk about something I think every language learner needs in their toolkit: the pause, don't panic strategy. This is all about how to handle moments when you get stuck or can't find the right words. Because let's face it, no one is immune to those moments when your mind goes blank, or when you suddenly forget a word you've been using for months. But here's the thing, panicking only makes it worse. When you find yourself in a situation where you're lost for words or unsure of what to say next, the first thing you should do is take a pause. It may sound counterintuitive. After all, you might feel like you need to speak as fast as possible to avoid feeling awkward. But pausing for a moment can actually be your secret weapon. Instead of rushing into a sentence or trying to force the words out, take a breath. Pause for a second. Give yourself that moment to think. It's not a sign of weakness. In fact, it shows control and thoughtfulness. The pause allows your brain to organize your thoughts and gives you time to find the right words, all without feeling pressured.
Yes, absolutely, Sophia. Pausing is so powerful. And the best part is that it doesn't make you look bad or less confident. It actually makes you look more confident. When you pause, you give the impression that you're carefully thinking about your response, rather than frantically searching for the right word. A lot of learners think they need to fill every silence with sound, but the reality is, a little pause can work wonders. It's important to remember that pauses don't have to be long. It doesn't have to be this awkward, drawn-out silence. Just a brief moment to gather your thoughts before continuing. And let's not forget, pauses also make you sound more natural. Native speakers often use pauses in conversation, whether they're gathering their thoughts or emphasizing a point. So, don't worry if you're not speaking at lightning speed. The pause gives you time to think and allows you to speak more clearly and confidently. And let me tell you something else. Pauses make you sound more fluent. Imagine you're having a conversation and someone speaks slowly with a lot of pauses. You might think they're uncertain, right? But if someone speaks slowly and purposefully, using well-timed pauses, they sound like they're really thinking about what they're saying. That's exactly how you can train your brain to speak with confidence.
Exactly, Adam. The goal here is not to speak quickly, but to speak deliberately and with intention. The more you practice this pause, the more comfortable you'll get with it, and soon you'll find that you're no longer afraid of those blank moments. They're just part of the process and you know how to handle them. One thing that really helped me when I was learning English was to normalize the pause in my head. At first, I would feel so self-conscious whenever I stopped to think. I'd think, oh no, I'm going to look silly. But then I realized something. Native speakers also pause. They pause to think. They pause to breathe. It's just part of how conversation flows. So, I began to embrace those pauses and see them as a tool rather than a roadblock. Another key element of the pause don't panic strategy is not to let fear take over. It's so easy to get anxious when you're speaking and your mind goes blank. But that panic only makes things worse. The best thing you can do when you pause is to stay calm and stay positive. Even if you don't know the exact word you're looking for, there are always ways to get your message across. You can describe what you mean, use simpler words, or even ask the person you're speaking with for help. It's all about keeping the conversation going, rather than letting fear stop you.
Staying calm is the key. And there's something else to remember when using the pause, don't panic strategy. Don't apologize for the pause. A lot of learners, especially beginners, tend to say things like, sorry, I'm thinking, or sorry, I don't know the word. But here's the thing. You don't have to apologize for pausing or thinking. Everyone has moments where they need a second to gather their thoughts. Native speakers do it all the time. So instead of saying sorry, just embrace the pause, take a deep breath, and continue. It's a completely natural part of conversation. And if you're in a situation where you truly can't find the right word or phrase, there's another little trick you can use. Paraphrasing. Instead of getting stuck, try to rephrase what you're trying to say using different words. For example, if you're trying to say, I went to the supermarket, but can't remember the word supermarket, you could say, I went to the place where they sell food. It's okay if the exact word doesn't come to you. It's about getting the message across, and paraphrasing helps you do that without breaking a sweat.
Such a great point, Adam. Paraphrasing is one of the best ways to keep the conversation going smoothly, even when you don't know a word. And honestly, most people will appreciate that you're trying to communicate, even if you're not using the exact words they expect. Another important element of the pause, don't panic strategy is practice. The more you practice pausing and thinking before you speak, the more natural it becomes. Try practicing in front of a mirror, just like we mentioned in Chapter 5, or practice with a speaking partner. You'll get better at staying calm, at pausing when necessary, and at finding ways to continue speaking without panic. And one more thing, don't be afraid to ask for help if you get stuck. You can say something like, "How do you say this in English?" or "Can you help me with this word?" People will be happy to assist, and this is another way to keep the conversation flowing without getting stuck in a panic. All right, let's dive into one of the most important keys to speaking confidently: daily speaking practice. And I'm not just talking about speaking with others, I'm talking about speaking alone. I know it sounds a bit strange at first, but trust me, speaking every day, even when no one else is around, is absolutely critical if you want to build your confidence. One of the biggest challenges for learners is finding opportunities to speak in English every day. If you don't live in an English-speaking environment or don't have many people to practice with, it can feel like you're stuck. But here's the secret. You don't need a conversation partner to practice speaking. You can do it on your own, and it's actually really effective. The key to this is turning everyday situations into speaking practice opportunities. For example, let's say you're cooking dinner. Instead of just thinking about what you're doing, describe your actions in English. I'm chopping the onions. I'm boiling the pasta. These little moments may seem small, but they add up. They help you practice thinking in English, and they give you the confidence to speak more naturally, even when you're by yourself.
That's such a great point, Sophia. People often think that speaking practice requires a conversation with someone else, but in reality, you can practice speaking anytime, anywhere. One of the easiest ways to fit in daily speaking practice is through something I call the speech journal. This is where you set aside a few minutes each day to talk about your day in English. You can describe what you did, how you felt, or what you're planning to do tomorrow. It's like keeping a spoken diary instead of a written one. The best part about the speech journal is that you don't need anyone to listen. You're just talking out loud, even if you're alone in your room or walking down the street. This exercise helps you get comfortable with forming sentences quickly and using different vocabulary. And of course, the more you do it, the more you'll see your speaking skills improve. Even if you don't have a lot of time, try to fit in just 5 to 10 minutes of speaking every day. Consistency is key. It's better to speak for a few minutes each day than to try to cram it all into one long session once a week.
Exactly, Adam. And something I've found really useful is using language learning apps that allow you to practice speaking aloud. Some apps let you speak into your phone and get instant feedback, which is great for self-correction. You don't need to wait for a tutor or a partner to tell you if your pronunciation is on point. You can practice speaking anytime. Another great way to practice alone is through shadowing. Yes, we talked about shadowing earlier in Chapter 5, but you can also do this by shadowing English language content on your own. Watch a short video, listen to a podcast, or even watch a movie scene, then repeat what you hear as closely as possible. Try to mimic the accent, tone, and rhythm. This helps you practice speaking fluently, even when you're alone, and you'll start to feel more natural when it's time to speak with others. And don't worry if you're not perfect at first. Just keep practicing. Remember, this is about getting comfortable speaking and not about speaking perfectly. If you make mistakes, that's completely fine. The more you practice, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
Absolutely, Sophia. Shadowing is such a fantastic way to practice because it mimics real-life conversation. And speaking of real-life situations, role-playing is another technique that can be done alone. You can create a mini scenario in your head, like being at a restaurant ordering food or at a store asking for help. Picture yourself in that situation and speak out loud as if you were talking to someone. It's like you're rehearsing for real-life conversations. Role-playing also helps you use the right vocabulary for specific situations. For example, if you're practicing ordering food at a restaurant, you'll naturally learn the phrases you need, like, "Can I have the menu, please?" or "I'd like to order the special." The more you practice these phrases, the more you'll feel confident using them when the time comes. And don't forget to record yourself sometimes. Listening back to your recordings can help you hear your pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. It might feel a little weird at first, but it's a great way to track your progress and see where you can improve.
Recording yourself is such a great idea, Adam. It's like having your own personal coach. You'll hear things you might not notice when you're speaking in the moment, and it gives you the chance to improve your pronunciation and fluency. Plus, it's fun to see how much you've improved over time. Another way to stay motivated and make daily speaking practice feel less like a chore is to set small, achievable goals. For example, tell yourself, "Today, I will practice speaking for 5 minutes about my favorite movie." Setting these small, specific goals keeps you focused and helps you track your progress. And when you achieve them, you'll feel proud of yourself, which keeps you motivated to continue practicing every day. Remember, daily speaking practice doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming. It can be as simple as describing your day, shadowing a podcast, or practicing a mini conversation in your head. The key is to make it a habit and practice every day. The more consistent you are, the more confident and fluent you'll become, and soon you won't hesitate to speak in English, even when you're alone.
Exactly, Sophia. The power of daily speaking practice, even if you're by yourself, is that it makes English feel like a natural part of your routine. Just like brushing your teeth or eating breakfast, it becomes something you do regularly, without thinking twice. And remember, you don't need to have long conversations to practice. Every little bit counts. Whether you're speaking for a few minutes or repeating sentences you've heard, you're constantly building your confidence. So, start today. Set aside just a few minutes for speaking practice and keep it consistent. Over time, you'll see major improvements.
Now that we've covered the importance of daily practice and how to manage hesitation, let's talk about something really exciting: conversation boosters. Simple tricks that will help you sound more fluent and confident in any conversation. These are easy to learn and can make a big difference when you're speaking in English. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. These conversation boosters are like little secret weapons that can make you sound more natural and comfortable when you speak. Let's start with a simple but powerful one: using fillers. Now I know what you're thinking. Fillers, isn't that something I should avoid? But hear me out. Fillers like, well, I mean, or even so, are actually really useful in natural conversation. The key here is to use them strategically. Native speakers use fillers all the time to give themselves a moment to think, and it makes their speech flow more smoothly. For example, if you're trying to answer a question but need a moment to gather your thoughts, you can say, "Well, I think that," or, "It's really interesting because." These fillers give you time to organize your thoughts and prevent awkward silences. The trick is to use them sparingly and naturally. You don't want to overdo it, but a few fillers here and there will make you sound much more fluent and conversational.
Exactly. Fillers are your friend, but they should never be used to replace thinking. They should only be there to keep the conversation flowing. Now, another simple but incredibly effective booster is paraphrasing. Just like we mentioned earlier in Chapter 6, paraphrasing is when you say the same thing, but in a slightly different way. It's a fantastic skill to use if you get stuck or if you want to clarify something. For instance, let's say you can't remember the word convenient. Instead of panicking or stopping, you could say, "It's really easy to use," or "It saves me a lot of time." You're still getting your point across, but in a way that's natural and effortless. It's also a great way to demonstrate your range of vocabulary. The more you paraphrase, the more confident you'll feel about expressing yourself in different ways, and it will make you sound more fluent and adaptable in conversations.
That's a great point, Sophia. Paraphrasing not only helps when you can't find the right word, but it also shows that you can use the language flexibly. Another trick that works wonders for fluency is using contractions. Native speakers use contractions all the time. I'm, you're, they'll, and so on. If you want to sound more fluent, Try using them instead of the full forms. For example, instead of saying I am going to the store, say I'm going to the store. It's quicker, smoother, and sounds much more natural. Now, I know some learners might be hesitant to use contractions because they think it's too informal, but the truth is, native speakers use them all the time, whether they're speaking casually or in more formal situations. So if you want to sound fluent, start using contractions whenever possible.
Absolutely, Adam. And that brings us to another fluency booster that's super effective: asking follow-up questions. When you're speaking, it's important to keep the conversation flowing, and one of the best ways to do that is by showing interest in the other person's response. Asking follow-up questions keeps the conversation going and makes you sound more engaged. For example, if someone says, "I've been learning English for a few years," you could respond with, "Oh, that's great! How did you get started?" Or, "What's been the hardest part of learning English for you?" Not only does this keep the conversation going, but it also gives you a chance to practice speaking in different situations and to learn new vocabulary. It's a win-win.
Yes, asking follow-up questions is a great way to keep the conversation dynamic. And don't be afraid to use expressions of agreement and disagreement. This will help you sound more natural. For example, when someone says something you agree with, instead of just saying yes, try using phrases like exactly or I totally agree. On the other hand, if you don't agree, you can say things like I see what you mean, but, or I'm not sure about that. These kinds of expressions make your speech more engaging and conversational. They also help you sound like you're really participating in the conversation rather than just listening passively.
Definitely. Using these expressions makes your speech sound much more fluid and less robotic. Now, one last booster I want to mention is having a variety of sentence structures. Native speakers don't always use the same sentence structure. They mix things up using questions, exclamations, and even incomplete sentences to add variety and keep things interesting. For example, instead of always saying, "I like this," try something like, "This is awesome," or "I'm really into this." Varying your sentence structures makes you sound more fluent and adds color to your speech. It helps you move away from simple repetitive sentences and adds a natural flow to your conversations.
Exactly, Sophia. The more varied your sentence structures, the more interesting and engaging your speech will be. So, to sum it up, here are the key conversation boosters you can use to sound more fluent. 1. Use fillers strategically to give yourself time to think. 2. Paraphrase when necessary to keep the conversation going smoothly. 3. Use contractions to make your speech sound more natural. 4. Ask follow-up questions to show engagement and keep the conversation moving. 5. Use expressions of agreement and disagreement to sound more involved. 6. Vary your sentence structures to make your speech more interesting. The great thing about these boosters is that they're simple and easy to use, but they make a huge difference in how fluent and confident you sound. Start practicing them today, and I promise you'll notice a difference in your conversations.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you've learned some valuable tips to help you speak English confidently and overcome hesitation in real conversations.
Remember, practice makes perfect, and the more you apply these strategies, the more fluent and confident you'll become. Keep speaking, keep learning, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop us a comment with your favorite tip from today's show.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep practicing and stay confident. Thank you.